Hello, my name is Jorb. I love gear, and this is the Moog Labyrinth. I find Labyrinth a little bit difficult to describe succinctly. Moog says parallel generative analog synthesizer, and that's helpful and descriptive. But normally you have some sort of an archetype to compare to. With the Mother 32, you can say this is a monosynth in this, Moog desktop format. The DFAM, you can say this is a rhythmic instrument, a rhythmic synthesizer in this format, but you can't really do that with Labyrinth. It's a collection of influences, it's a collection of modules. There's a lot of West Coast flavor here, there's a lot of West Coast sort of methodology here, but really not all of it. And what makes it hardest to sort of compare to anything bigger, the thing that defines the experience the most, are these two sequencers. They're both 8-step, sort of shift registers, sort of Turing machines, but they really are their own thing. It's really not like many other things I've ever used. And I find it hard to really explain that in any meaningful way without having hands on it, so we're going to jump right into that. This video is sponsored, so thank you, Moog. If you're a subscriber, appreciate you coming back. If you're a patron, that means the world to me. If you want to support me in any other way, follow me on Instagram, use my affiliate links, especially, that's very helpful. In the description, that is everything you need to know. Let's make some noise. Here we are on the table with the Labyrinth, parallel generative analog synthesizer. I think all of those are important to remember. Parallel especially. I will continue to emphasize as I walk through this. With a fixed architecture synthesizer, I like to sort of follow the signal path. This is the oscillators, and then the filters, and then envelope generators, whatever, when I describe it. I don't think that really works for the Labyrinth. So many of the circuits influence each other and are controlled by each other and are routed to each other that it doesn't make sense to try and do it that way. So I'm going to start with the heart of the Labyrinth. What defines this experience more than any other part of it is these two sequencers. They're both 8-step sequencers. If you're familiar with the Turing machine, shout out musicthing modular, and Tom Whitwell, what a very cool guy, then you'll be familiar with a lot of this terminology. But there are some fundamental differences that make the experience of using these pretty dramatically different. I'm rambling a little bit, but I think it makes sense to start with the sequence and branch out from there and explain the modules as we get to them, okay? So I'm going to run this sequence. I'm going to turn up VCO1 so you can hear every time we hit one of these steps, I'm triggering our two envelope generators. They're simple. They're just decay, but I'm not changing our pitch. To change our pitch, I need to increase the range of the sequencer going out and increase the range of its modulation to VCO1. And that's unquantized right now. I want to lock it to a scale. Bit shift, and then let's do 4 for... You can lock it to a bunch of things. That's pentatonic. Okay, already we're somewhere. To track volt per octave, go all the way up to QTZ quantized. And if I change this sequencer 1 CV range, that's like an attenuator before the quantizer. I can say deviate overall less from our reference pitch, but stay locked to whatever scale we've got picked. If I want to change what's in this sequencer, I can't directly do that. I can just influence it to change. I can decide how likely it is to change. So if I turn corruption from 0 to noon, there's a chance that every time it goes over a step, it'll change the note that it's going to play, or the CV, or the voltage that's coming out of there, and you can hear it's changing a lot. But I haven't changed the triggers at all. To change the triggers, put corruption past noon, and now every time it goes over a step, there's a chance that it'll flip that bit. If it's off, it'll turn on. If it's on, it'll turn off. And if I end up liking where I'm at, I can slam this down back to 0, and it'll keep running exactly as it is. If I want to hand pick different triggers, I can advance through, and let's say I want to turn this bit off. I hit bit flip there, and I want to turn this one off. I hit bit flip there, and I run it. That's what it is. Okay, I like those triggers. Let's just introduce a little bit of chance for the notes to change. I like that one too. How about more chance for the notes to change? And let it sort of build and change on itself as it goes. And it's sort of embracing that generative element of it, that randomness of it, is a big part of the Labyrinth and what makes it unique. If you land on something you like, you can save it into the buffer, and then that'll be what's on the synth when you turn it off and back on. So there is a way to save a single sequence. and that is like sort of all the digital settings are retained here. Anything that's a knob isn't retained. So that's where we were originally, and I do really like that patch. Just to demonstrate, and say I really, really just want to change this totally. So if I turn corruption way up, turn tempo way up, then we've got a totally different sequence. You know, because where the playhead is where you have a chance for something to change. If you just ram it through high corruption, then that's how you can sort of immediately get to something totally different. You can also shorten the length. This can be 6 steps, 5 steps, anything all the way down to 1, or all the way back. Sort of interesting to do odd numbers. Don't see that very often. If you hold length and hit reset, it'll go back to 8. And I can shift this whole sequence where it's at. So if I hit reset, this is where our notes are right now. This is where our triggers are right now, right? If I hit bit shift, everything's going to move 1 to the right, and 8 will come all the way back around to 1. That's kind of your like crash course in what the hell's going on here. And it lets me explain what we're hearing with the audio. So you've heard that we're triggering 2 different decay envelopes. One for our VCA, for our level, you can hear that for sure. But also one on envelope generator 1, which is on our filter, which you'll definitely hear, but it's also going to a wave folder. I guess I should explain wave folders on their own if you aren't familiar. I know it's not so normal, but let's listen to just the wave folded output. I'll bring it down to 0, and I'll turn off any of its modulation. So that's just the output of our mixer. Right now, that's just our first VCO. Moog mixers often will overdrive over 50%. You see that gets flat on top. So the level matters, and then folding. And then wave folding sort of pulls, once you get past the headroom, sort of pulls that wave in, sort of pulls it back down, folds it in on itself. And this bias is like a DC offset, a flat voltage offset. So you can fold mostly the bottom part of the wave coming back up, or the top part of the wave coming back down. That can be modulated. By envelope 1, just like the filter. It's adding harmonics instead of taking them away like a filter does. Just a different way to approach, just a different way to approach controlling and generating sounds. Very, very cool. So remember I said parallel, don't forget that. After the mixer here, so the mixer is both of these oscillators, a few other things, that gets split, one into the wave folder, one to the filter cutoff. The way those are routed into each other, we have control of here. And then the output, which one we're listening to, we have control of here. So we're going to leave it in parallel. This is just the filter. If I blend all the way here, just the wave folder, controlled by that same envelope. So there's our first parallel, okay? We can blend between these two very different ways of controlling harmonics. But while I'm listening just to the filter, if I put the order here, the wave folder in to the filter, I'm increasing those harmonics before I'm pulling them away. Or vice versa. I'm going filter into the wave folder. Don't hear it right now because I have to change what we're listening to. I need to blend all the way over to just listening to the wave folder. That parallel routing is so complex, especially this sort of order switch combined with the blend. You really have a ton of possibilities. And the whole range here, let's say I just want a little bit of the wave folder. Let it be underneath. blend it in real low, or vice versa. And yeah, all these, I feel like these parallel blendings are like really complicated for an unpatched system. It's cool that they're available, but it's like pretty easy to get lost. So I haven't really talked about Oscillator 2 at all, and it is called the mod VCO, so let's treat it like that at first. Primarily, it's for modulating other things, in this case, a lot of the time, VCO 1. This is a very West Coast idea. I think it's the Buchla 259 I'm thinking of, the sort of prescribed purpose, you know, of one oscillator to modulate another. Regardless, that's what we're getting from VCO 1. I can modulate its pitch with VCO 2. Subtly. Or really dramatically. And we can go all the way up in audio rates. Which sounds pretty good. Or we can modulate the level of VCO 1 effectively. So ring modulation. Ring modulation is an input on our mixer here, where we're modulating the level of Oscillator 1 with Oscillator 2. Think of it like a tremolo. If I just bring it in a little bit, but also regular VCO 1, they'll interact. Just another way to introduce some movement. That does have interesting results if you fold the result, because the mixer is what goes to the folder. And of course, also an audio rate. So that's using it as an LFO, so to speak, if you think about it like a modulation oscillator, but it can track volt per octave just like VCO 1. If I'm back here in the mixer, I turn down VCO 1 and up VCO 2, or the mod VCO. There it is. I've tuned it to be something. It, by default, is controlled by sequencer 2. And you might notice something weird already. But this is our sort of second, like, very parallel moment. Both of our envelopes are triggered by a blend here between sequencer 1 and sequencer 2. Right now, it's just on sequencer 1. But the pitches I'm hearing are controlled here by sequencer 2. So if I let the VCA really ring out, you can hear it sort of changing pitch there when we don't have a trigger. But if I bring it into the middle here, it's pretty interesting, even though this is only these 4 steps. Shortened to 7, I should point out right now. So that's just sequencer 2. Why don't we just trigger, even though we're not listening to these pitches, let's just use these triggers to make this more interesting. Or let's say I mostly want it to be sequencer 1 with a little bit of sequencer 2. Or if I go back to VCO 1, just for a little bit here, and I use these as sort of an accent, let's say, and I have this blend a little further towards sequencer 2, where these are weighted really heavily. We're sort of emphasizing where these hit more than we are what we hear there. So the two sequencers together can sort of, they can be two sets of pitches and triggers, or they can both be affecting sound paths, or you can just have all of that happening at once. I'm getting pitches from here, I'm getting triggers from both, they're emphasizing each other, And I can use the sequencers to modulate all sorts of other stuff. So if I bring in a little bit of sequencer 2 to the VCF and sequencer 1 to the wave folder, this is already like pretty complicated. And if let's bring in some delay. That's good. Introduce some note changes here. This is a pretty complicated thing to be happening without any patch cables. And to me, that sort of step-by-step patching is where I really understood the name Labyrinth, and this diagram in the manual. They have the circuit diagram laid out like a maze, because it is sort of like all these different sections lead into each other, connect to each other in ways you might not expect. It looks like a maze. These circuits are represented sort of as rooms, and the connections between them make it clear that so many of these things influence each other and control each other. And if you let yourself sort of follow that maze, moving from circuit to circuit, letting a modulation routing guide you or an audio routing guide you to another circuit, to another room, if you follow it like a maze, you let the circuits, you let the way they're routed guide you around the synthesizer, you end up building a sort of complex interconnected patch just by virtue of following what's already connected without even utilizing the patch bay. I think that's all I want to say in this first section. Sort of understanding what Labyrinth is, I think, takes all that time. I think it's so clearly defined by these sequencers, like 70%, of what makes a Labyrinth what it is right here in the way you interact with them and the way they control. And that last, it would be 30%, I guess, is this sort of the presentation of these unconventional routings, of blending your triggers, of blending between two parallel sort of harmonically controlled audio paths, plus all the sort of parallel, so to speak, modulation. Sequencer 2 is affecting your cutoff and the pitch of one of your oscillators. There's all these sort of branching paths. How about I get us somewhere more complicated and then I break down what it is we're hearing? Okay, so the first patch idea I've got, one of the things I'm missing the most, one of the things I would really like to have here is different waveforms for these oscillators. Being limited to these low harmonic waves means you're pretty restricted in what you can get out of just the filter, using the filter without the wave folder. And if we didn't get increased harmonics from the mixer, then you would almost hear no change. There is a way we can get a sawtooth out of these complex oscillators. Thank goodness for a good patch bay. We can use oscillator sync. No, not my good buddy, the YouTuber oscillator sync. We can use the synthesis design feature of oscillator sync. If you don't know, it resets the period of one oscillator at the frequency of another. We only have sync for the mod VCO. That's okay. That's all I need. And I want to trigger that with oscillator 1. We actually don't have an output for oscillator 1. Which again I think is kind of a miss, but we do have an output of the mixer. So if I sacrifice our mixer, I can sync oscillator 2 to oscillator 1. Okay, but what am I hearing right now? I'm just hearing oscillator 1. So I need to find the output of the MVCO. There it is. And I need to bring that into something we can hear. Let's do the filter. There it is. And if I find just the right spot, it'll be a pretty good sawtooth. So here they are, about at the same frequency. So we're just hearing
a triangle.
But as I reduce its rate, I can get it to a point where VCO1 is resetting it halfway through the triangle, so we're getting a saw. But notice, as I run the sequence, that wave is changing. So I also need to modulate its pitch, just like I am oscillator 1. So I need to get the sequencer 1 CV out and run that into the mod VCO. And there we are. I love that. And even without any more patching, it lets me blend in to the wave-folded result of oscillator 1. I think that gets us more interesting results from the filter in general, and it means this blend is sort of more interesting, more valuable. That took 3 patch cables and sacrifices the use of the mixer, because if I adjust the filter and I introduce, I want to mix in this, well, right now it doesn't do that. That's introducing other stuff to the sort of syncing signal of oscillator 2. And sure, you can get cool waves that way. But I just want a clean sawtooth. And yeah, so that's 2 things that I think are like, why isn't that here? Is not having an output for oscillator 1 and not having on either of these a waveform switch. When I, like the Buchla stuff, I'm thinking of the complex oscillators and even the clones of it or the sort of modern iterations of it, like the DPO, like the Verbose Electronics complex oscillator. All of those have higher harmonic waves available, I think, from both. So I think that's kind of a miss. I digress. I don't want to complain that much. All right. I do think that's that example pretty well explored. How about the next one? This is another trick that sort of accomplishes something that I hoped I could do here. But I am in a Eurorack case, the Kaisha 104. I do have a bunch of other modules over here. They won't be important until later. The only one we'll actually use is the Nano Modules Ona. It's an oscillator that I like for a bunch of reasons, but this specific trick is pretty weird. I'm not using any of the modules in the Kaisha yet, but I will in the next example. Anyway, I replaced the Delver with a Volante. I needed easier access to tap tempo. That's my pattern right now. I want to introduce some swing. I don't want it to be evenly on the beat. I want some irregularities. You might have seen me. I've done it a few times. I don't know the order in which these things are getting edited, but I've been using sequencer 1 to trigger the clock in of sequencer 2. And if I trigger off of sequencer 2, you can get some irregularities that way. Or even if I manually, let's say, so if I set it up like this, just pairs of 2, and I shorten our length to be like that, just 2, skip, 2, skip. Da boom, ba boom, 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 boom. That is sort of swing, because watch this play head or right head. Boom, 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 boom. You're changing the timing. You're shifting every other one sort of closer or further away. I don't love that because that takes up sequencer 1, and what if I want to keep sequencer 1? So what I've come up with, and this is a little silly, but I need to use something external to clock the synthesizer. So I'm using this Nano Modules Ona in LFO mode, and I need to combine 2 of these waveforms, 2 of these outputs, so that we get triggers in different spots in its sort of cycle. And I found, after trying a bunch of them, if I do this shark tooth and this 1 octave down square, and I have, luckily, this utility mixer already on the Labyrinth. And if I send that UMix 1 and 2 out to clock 1, which gets sent to clock 2, then it'll be fine. I'm going to fill in the rest of these bits just so you can hear it. Bum, 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 bum. So that is totally working. Another trick, I guess I just haven't shown you, you can chain the 2 sequencers together and have one 16-step sequence. You can separately corrupt them, which is pretty cool, but all the sequencer CVs, so like anything that says 1 or 2, it's now the whole 16-step sequencer with the trigger, with the CV ranges. Now this is really imperfect because I'm using this oscillator as that sort of double clock source, but if you had an actual clock divider, which is something I really, really need, then it wouldn't be so jank like this. There you go. That felt kind of simple, but it still is all stuff I really want to show you. Anyway, I didn't explain the rest of the modules because I'm about to show you them now. Here we are. Again, now I have it mounted in a Eurorack case. This is the Nano Modules Kaisha 104. I really, really love it. It's got this super handy utility row on top. But anyway, my point with the patch, my goal with the patch, was extract as many voices, extract as much as I could out of the sequencers working in tandem. Part of that is adding an additional oscillator. This is the Nano Modules ONA. I like a lot about the ONA, but having combined wave outputs for almost any combination, especially ones that include square waves, so you can use pulse width, I find that really handy too. Then we have the Acid Rain Navigator, the Create Function Junction, and the IntelliGel Quad VCA. Those are all like sort of supporting additional envelopes in LFO. Other VCAs, that's all to sort of make it possible to hear and use and mix the other voices. A WMD Orion phaser at the very end that I might turn on, I might not. And then this navigator is to control some modulation by hand. And then everything is running through a Strymon Volante. Is that on screen? I might be in front of that sometimes. But over here, Strymon Volante for delay and a little bit of reverb. Anyway, I've got 4 voices that you're going to hear. I'm actually going to take my vocal out of the oscilloscope. You're going to hear 4 voices. First, this is sequencer 2. Controlling the ONA through the filter of the Labyrinth. And I'm controlling it with this envelope generator over here. From the function junction. Really, really like that. Again, I think this filter is so good, being able to run something like a Sawtooth through it. I really wish it was easier to run a Sawtooth through it. Anyway, if I unplug this, we can listen to 2 more voices. So one is this is a sort of hi-hat. I'm using all 3 of I'm using every channel of the function junction, that is 2 envelope generators and an LFO, to control the noise that's in Labyrinth, and it's getting us a sort of shifting, moving hi-hat. Let me turn off the delay. I like that it's sort of pulsing, and it is related, of course, to the sequences. Also, coming through this same VCA here is the mod VCO, VCO 2 of the Labyrinth, and that's getting the same notes as sequencer 2 here, but it's getting more triggers. It's triggering on all the same stuff that hi-hat is triggering on. So if I bring back that filtered voice, that's like a complementary bass line to it. Love all that. If I blend all the way over here, you're going to hear our last voice. This is just VCO1 with the folder, and this is in parallel to accomplish that. But I have to blend through these to hear them. So if Why don't I just bring everything in? Especially the delay. Oh, and I guess I should mention it before I go much further. I'm triggering sequencer 2 off of the trigger of sequencer 1. So it gets kind of changed as sequencer 1 changes. I've got them corrupted right now. So even if I'm not changing the triggers here, its sort of pattern is changing. I really, really like that trick a lot. Anyway, back to it. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on with that. And I really, really do like the sounds. I really, really do like the control. But it's sort of just revealed to me, like, trying to get this many voices out of it and trying to use it in this way, I'm really butting up against a lot of the sort of limits of the patch bay. I want individual outputs of the folder and the filter. I can't get that. You can't do that. You have to rely on this blend between the filter and the folder because you only have one combined VCA out. I find that, like, I find it pretty challenging to mix like this, and what I wanted to do was pan them so it was easier to hear them separately, and you can't do that. So I just ended up running the whole thing mixed down to mono. I find that to be a frustration. You saw me doing a lot of manually playing with these CV ranges. I wish that was something I could sequence, either with the quantizer in and out separately, which makes me want ins and outs after the sequencer and before the quantizer. All sorts of little things like that where it's like, if only, if only, if only, if only. Not to say that combining this with other things, other modules, isn't the way to go. I think it is. I think you get so much out of it. But just that because I'm used to the openness and it is so flexible and all these unconventional routings, I want to do so many more complicated things. And you just kind of... And I feel a little bit limited by this whole patch bay, these ins and outs. But in working on this, I did find another cool trick. So if I really specifically want to change this note, it's everything is perfect. I don't want to introduce corruption to ruin everything else, but this one note is higher or lower than I'd like it to be. You can flip that one bit off and on, and it'll generate a new voltage for you. Just a very convenient way to steer the sequencer a little bit more. But I like that. I like where that ended up. I think I'm going to try and make something really, really complicated for this last demo.